Happy Monday, Jackie here from TVA Law. So, today I wanted to talk about disabled beneficiaries. It was prompted because over the break I've had a couple of interactions with parents. One was a similar age to me, and they have a fairly young child, still preschool age, who is quite severely autistic, and they're worried about whether that child is going to end up being able to live independently or not. And I suppose the coming 10 years or so will tell. But they had to think about what to provide for her in the event they weren't available. And while it's, I suppose, every parent's nightmare that their child ends up an orphan, I think it's probably even more so for parents who have disabled children. And the other interaction I had was with a older lady who had a son who was also, in his 20s or so, with Down syndrome. So it was unlikely he was ever going to be able to live completely independently. And again, her worst nightmare as a parent is that he would be left alone. But while it's their worst fear, it's also something that needs to be addressed. And I think that many parents who have disabled beneficiaries or disabled children don't take the step to explore properly what they can do because they are so worried. Hence, I just quickly wanted to talk about a few options that parents have. So we don't want to leave a disabled child out of a will. You've got a big obligation to provide for someone who is not going to ever be able to provide for themselves. If you leave out a beneficiary who's disabled, and this can include a beneficiary who's mentally ill as well, they would have a really good claim on your will to be able to get probably more than you might have otherwise left to them if you were going to leave things equally to them and their siblings. So the other thing that you do need to consider as well is whether your disabled child will end up on a disabled pension. So with the older mother with the child with Down syndrome, we already knew that he was on a disability pension. So we have to think about making sure that inheritance won't affect or impact a pension too greatly. And with the other family that I interacted with, their child is way too young to know whether she's going to be able to live independently or work at all, because of the level of autism that she had, but she's too young at this point to work out. So considering a pension for her is probably not as important as for the Down syndrome child who already has a pension. When you give a child inheritance, whether you give it to them directly or whether you leave it to them in a trust, it is counted as part of their assets for a pension test. So we do have to be smart about what we do here. And there's basically three kinds of trusts that you can leave a disabled child. Yes, you could just give them their inheritance outright and hope for the best, hope that their siblings step up, or hope that the state trustees are appointed to look after their finances. But best to take more control of it than that. Hope is never a strategy. So the three kinds of trusts you can set up. Well, the first one's called a protective trust. Now this is fairly limiting, and I tend to think that a protective trust is better for someone with a mental illness or a gambling problem, or a drug and alcohol problem, because a protective trust sets aside the inheritance for that beneficiary but doesn't let them touch it at all. All they get is the income from it. So they get some money trickling to them in the form of like a annuity, but again, might not be enough. particularly if they've got issues with housing, etc. You can't dip into the protective trust to cover their accommodation needs. So that's the first type of trust. The second type of trust you could set up is more just like a broad testamentary discretionary trust. If you've got the other children or other family members that you can trust to look after that money for the child who can't look after it for themselves, and whether they're willing to take on that burden. Sometimes someone who is left money for someone else to control can get quite aggressive, so they have to be prepared to put up with that situation. But at least with a family discretionary trust, there's much more room and flexibility than there is with a protective trust. Or the third type of trust, which I think is ultimately the best, is called a special disability trust. Now this trust is special because Centrelink approves of them. It is special because it's not assessed as part of the Centrelink asset test. And a certain amount of money can go in there for the accommodation and care of that child. And that amount is up towards $500,000. It goes up every year. So even if you use a combination of a couple of different trusts, if the inheritance that you're leaving to your disabled child is more than about $450,000, you might leave them two different trusts, utilising the special disability trust for $450,000 and another trust for the rest. Of course, you can do a combination of the two. Even if it's less than $450,000, you might direct that $250,000 go in a special disability trust and that there'd be a more flexible trust for the rest. So when we're setting these up, we can look at the pension test at the time that you're setting it up. We can make clauses to make sure that the amounts change depending on the test at the time that you actually pass away. So there are actually so many options that we can make sure that your disabled children are looked after you pass away. Because I know that it's a parent's greatest fear that their child is left alone, particularly if they're disabled. However, it's better to do something than nothing. And like I say, hope is not a strategy. So there's a few ideas around different trusts that you can use. And look, there are really a whole lot of other options that we can explore, but that's the basics. It's the start, so you can start thinking about it. And if there is someone that you know with a disabled child, please share this with them, tag them in this, so that they can come back and look at this video in their own time, so that they can really think about what they need to attend to. Likewise, I do these videos every Monday. All the videos are saved onto the page. So if you go into the videos section on our Facebook page, you can scroll through and see so many different topics in there that might be relevant for you at the time, or anyone else. In fact, if you have a friend going through an issue, do some research for them. You're quite welcome to do that. So next Monday, I'll be back again, 10 o'clock. I hope you have a great week. I hope everyone stays safe in this hot weather, and catch you with a legal tip next week. See you later.